His Excellency the Governor, Honourable Premier, Honourable Deputy Premier, other Ministers of Government, honoured guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a very great pleasure to be back here again. Russell, thank you very much for inviting me back. I must not have committed an international incident or diplomatic incident last year. I'll try to avoid it again this year. I like the productive day very much, Russell. I note there was no guidance on what to do between 7 and 10 p.m. after you'd had a couple of drinks, which I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing. As Russell said, I'm going to be talking a little bit about some market research that we do. I'm from Oil, Offshore Corporations Limited. We're part of the broader Vista Group. We're one of the largest corporate service providers in the world. We have more than 2,000 staff and offices in 40+ countries. And 6 years ago, we looked around the landscape, we looked at our friends in the industry, we looked at our enemies in the industry, and we said, what are they thinking? What are the trends? What are the sort of things that are going on? And there was no real work done in terms of what happens in the industry. So we started doing our own market research. This is year 6, and the third year that Russell's kindly invited me to come and talk about some themes here. So we call it Offshore 2020. It's the only market research study of its kind, and it's getting bigger every year. So now we have 320 respondents. How do I do the pointer? Right, very good. So these are very, very senior people within the industry. These are law firms, corporate service providers, regulators, all the people that are involved in the sort of work that we do in the financial services industry, both on and offshore around the world. And we have a split of sort of 46% of people are from Asia and 54% from sort of outside of Asia. And that's something that's changed over the last few years. We started doing this work originally in Hong Kong. 13% of all of our respondents were from the BVI. Some of them are in this room. So thank you very much for responding to our survey. We will be doing it again later on this year. So 320 respondents overall. We're going to look at some demand issues. So what drives demand in the offshore industry? Excuse me. This is very fast. We're going to look at client segments. We're going to look at why people are using some structures. We're going to look at growth markets. Russell's already talked about some interesting stuff in relation to China. We're going to talk about constraints on business. We're going to talk about regulation. You can't do anything now at the moment without talking about regulation. We're going to talk about some jurisdictional studies, how people within the industry are ranking jurisdictions in terms of popularity. Everybody very much likes that one. And then I'm going to sort of ad-lib at the end there and talk about some sort of BVI-specific issues following on some from work that we did last year as well. So this is the first question that we asked our respondents. And this, again, is something that we've tracked over a few years' time. So all the new regulation, all these changes that are happening in the industry, the fundamental question is, what will that effect have on underlying demand for offshore structures? And what we see in the answers is very, very much a split response. The red color is the 2015 respondents. All of this, by the way, is in the booklets that you have there in each of your bags. 2014 was last year. So we have a very split response. 36% of people, so just over a third, say that all of this regulation, negative PR, will have an adverse effect on demand for offshore structures, including in the BVI. 30% of people are saying, though, that actually the overall demand is not going to change, but there are going to be some winners and losers among different jurisdictions. So some jurisdictions are going to benefit, some jurisdictions are going to lose out as a result of this. And then 28% of people are saying, actually, the regulation doesn't matter so much. This is really very much driven by underlying economic activity. When the economy is good, when things are going well, the demand will be strong. When not so good, less strong. So that's the perceptions of people that we see in terms of asking this question about demand going forward. Quite a split response. So those are the perceptions. Let's look at the reality. So what we've done here on the bottom line is we've taken 7 or 8 of the leading offshore jurisdictions in the world. So we've got BVI, Cayman, Seychelles, Samoa, Mauritius, Anguilla, Jersey, and Guernsey. And we've added up all of the numbers of new incorporations that are done in each one of those jurisdictions since 2011. And you can see that that number is not increasing. It's actually going down a little bit. It's decreasing by about 2% on an annual basis. So where is that going? Where is that incorporation business going? Is it going somewhere else? We've spoken quite a lot in previous years about midshore, places like Hong Kong, Singapore, Cyprus, Malta, even the UK and the US. So is that incorporation business going there? And we looked at Hong Kong and Singapore, and actually it doesn't seem to be going there either. So there are this sort of trend where the number of incorporations does seem to be going down a little bit. Not falling off a cliff, these numbers are not crashing, but does seem to be going down a little bit. But actually, if we look at the next slide here, this is those same jurisdictions that we've added up, and this is the total number of entities that actually are active. So not just the new incorporations, but all of those that remain active going forward. And you'll see that actually that number is increasing. When we did this slide, it was a little bit earlier, so it's probably gone down a little bit due to poor market conditions in the fourth quarter of 2015. But you'll see that overall, the number of offshore companies that are active in the world is continuing to increase. So this is good news. So new incorporation numbers are decreasing slightly globally. I'll talk about the BVI in a second. But the number of companies is still slightly increasing. Now, this is obviously of great interest to us. We're the largest incorporator of BVI companies in the world, or the largest incorporator of Seychelles companies, Samoa companies, and other jurisdictions. So we look at these sorts of statistics and things very, very carefully. And what we did was we mapped out that if the number of new incorporations every year decreases by 2%, and then renewal rates of all active companies stays consistent with what it is now, which is about 89%, what will happen? And what will happen is that actually this number would continue to increase up until about 2025, when it would plateau and then it would start to decrease. Now that's based on all of the jurisdictions, so not just the BVI. Now, unfortunately, as we've seen in the BVI over the last 5 years, that actually the new incorporation numbers have gone down 30% from 2012 through to the end of 2015. So that's the last 4 years, the number has actually decreased by 30%. And what has happened here is the number on the active, so all the active companies on the register has stayed level during that time. Okay? So these are some of the things that we're seeing both in the BVI, but also globally. This question looks at what segments of the market. We cut up the market into lots of different segments to see where growth is coming from, to see who's performing, to see where demand is coming from. And what this does is this shows where respondents to our survey are seeing growth coming from over the next 5 years. And what they are seeing, both in Asia, which is the red bars, and in the rest of the world, is that growth is coming from entrepreneurs and high net worth individuals. And I think this is an excellent thing for the BVI. It's very much the BVI sweet spot in terms of the users of BVI structures. So I think this is something encouraging. You'll see here multinationals is quite a bit lower than maybe we might have thought. We've got fund industry looking very strong in Asia there, and family office strong, and that was particularly strong in Europe when we split up the figures. So I think this is an encouraging figure, that where people within the industry see growth coming from over the next 5 years is from entrepreneurs. We've already had some interesting discussions with the Premier this morning about entrepreneurs and high net worth individuals. So very much in the BVI's wheelhouse. Growth markets. Where is business going to come from over the next 5 years? Again, according to our respondents. And Russell's sort of been prefacing this for us. And you'll see here 72% of people are saying that this is going to come primarily from Greater China. Southeast Asia comes a very strong second, and then pretty much everywhere else in the world is seen as coming equal third. So Greater China, so China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, everybody's seeing as their most important growth area. One of the things that's interesting about our work now as the market research gets bigger is we can split it up into who is responding where and to what. So these figures about China and Asia, this was not just from people that are based in Asia. This is based on people from the Caribbean, from Europe, from all over the world. Everyone feels the same thing. And Russell's already touched on this. This is a look at offshore companies and financial services. But if we change this chart and we looked at luxury goods, high-end perfume, commodity, whatever it is, you might get a fairly similar chart that people are seeing, anticipating over the next 5 years the majority of growth to come from Greater China and then followed by Southeast Asia. So again, very, very encouraging for the BVI. A huge percentage of the offshore industry here is driven from particularly Hong Kong and Greater China, and the BVI has a very, very strong and long affinity with that part of the world. So this, again, I would say is very encouraging for the BVI. On to slightly more negative side, we're talking about constraints. What are the constraints that people see in their business? And this is ranked from out of 1 to 5, and 5 being the most significant. So we'll see here that bank accounts is still an issue, and then we've got regulations top and AML processes, same sort of thing, both coming in the top 3. This is a change from previous studies. In last year's work, it was very much competition and pricing that was seen as the most significant constraint on people's business. Not surprisingly, with FATCA coming online, CRS, all of these other sort of initiatives, and we've got lots and lots of change happening here in the industry, which I'll talk about in a couple of moments. It's not surprising that now people are seeing that the biggest constraint on their new business is regulation. And then obviously the sort of standard due diligence stuff and stuff as well is very significant and important to them still also. This is a bit of a sort of complex table here, and there is actually 2 aspects to it. I'll just click through. So the first question that we asked is which of the following is likely to happen by 2020? And the gray bars are the 2014 results, and the red bars are the 2015 results. So what we have here is that 72% of respondents said that full implementation of CRS is likely by 2020. People said that by 2020, 59% of people said by 2020 there would be a central non-public register of beneficial ownership, that would be a global standard. Only 16%, which interestingly is down from last year, thought that beneficial owner information would be public by 2020. So people generally didn't think that that would evolve into an international industry standard. And encouragingly, a smaller number also thought that actually there would be no more offshore industry by 2020, that it would be gone and buried. So only 5% of people thought that was the case, down from 7% last year. And interestingly, some of the work that we did in this year's survey was we actually reached out to people that go out of their way to criticize the industry. And the paper's quite long and quite dense, but if you can read through it, there's some quite interesting sort of comments from those sorts of NGOs and activist bodies that very much criticize the industry. And you can read what their comments are and what they think about the industry as well. The second part of this table is which of these things would cause the most impact if it's happened. And again, from 1 to 5, and 5 being the most impact. So what respondents have said here, that over 3 is obviously the end of the offshore industry would impact their business, no question. But also that publicly available beneficial owner information would be, and we'll use term, sorry, Premier, game changer, that would be that would have a very, very significant detriment to the industry. The next one is having a central non-public registry of beneficial ownership. That's a 3 out of 5. So teetering on the edge of whether that's achievable, whether that's possible, or the extent to which that would have detrimental effects on the industry. Okay, so looking at regulation. And we see the narrative of regulation changing over the last few years. If we go back 10 years ago, the conversation that we were having in the private sector might have been, do we really need regulation? And then the situation evolved, and then, yes, we have to have regulation. There has to be regulation. So then it would be, well, what sort of regulation? How much regulation? And now, over the last few years, all this regulation has been imposed. And then really, the question to us now is, how is all of that regulation going to be implemented? So this is the question that we asked respondents. So how will new regulation globally be enforced? And this is one of the most striking things that we found, that only 4% of respondents felt that all of the global regulation that's being introduced would be introduced consistently and apolitically. Only 4% of people thought that that would actually happen. So 54% said it would be political and inconsistent, and 38% people said key countries are going to make their own exemptions for whatever suits them. And only 4%, as I said, this is going to be consistent, political, fair to everybody, everybody playing on the same playing field. So quite a striking result, we felt. Right, so we're going to talk about jurisdictions. So every year, for the last 6 years, we've done this work, and we've asked people, what are the most important jurisdictions to you as someone who participates at a high level in the financial services industry? And very pleasingly for the BVI, for the last 5 years, the BVI has been the #1 jurisdiction every year from the outset. And so this year, the BVI again in 2015 is assessed as the top jurisdiction. And what we have here is what we call the Big Four. And this is BVI, Cayman, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And we call these the Big Four jurisdictions, where you can do, we've got offshore jurisdictions, you've got midshore jurisdictions, you've got lots and lots and lots of things that you can do within those 4 jurisdictions. So that Big Four that we identified sort of 3 or 4 years ago, those are still at the top. And we could split this out now, again, looking at Asian markets and non-Asian markets, and to see the results. And when we look at the Asian market, we see BVI and Hong Kong even higher, and actually that Big Four is even stronger. When we look at the non-Asian markets, and what we did on the non-Asian markets is we actually cut out all of those people that responded from the Caribbean, because Lorna, I know when you did the survey, you'd have put BVI. And you know, we all would have done the same thing as well. So we thought that probably wasn't very fair. So what we did, so we cut out all of the Caribbean respondents when we look at this particular statistic. But even cutting those out, the BVI still came #1 in terms of jurisdictions now, and Hong Kong, Cayman, Singapore as well. So those are the figures now. So we're moving on to the next slide. This is what people think will happen in 2010. So this is respondents sitting here now saying what they think the most important jurisdictions are going to be 5 years on from now. And what we've seen when we've done this work over the last few years is that every year respondents anticipate that BVI and Cayman, so the pure offshore, the leading offshore jurisdictions, are going to become less popular. We've seen this every year over the last few years. But every year, when we come back and we ask them what is the most popular jurisdiction at the moment, it's still the BVI, it's still those top 4 jurisdictions. So one of the very, very striking things about the work that we've done over the last few years has been the resilience of what we would refer to as the quality offshore jurisdictions, BVI and Cayman in particular. So that's very, very encouraging. So 2010, people are saying, we've got the same top 4 here. Now, BVI is not on the top, that's not what's anticipated, but it's right up there. So people are anticipating 5 years from now, that you'll still have the same big four, and they will still be the most important jurisdictions. Asian markets, yes, same top four. Not surprisingly, they've gone a bit more towards their own local mid-shore jurisdictions, Hong Kong and Singapore coming first, but the same big four. Now, one of the things that we think is interesting here is looking at what we found in looking at the non-Asian markets in 2010. That we've got Hong Kong, we've got Singapore, we've got United Arab Emirates, so particularly Dubai, we've got Luxembourg, we've got the UK, US. Look where the US is here. So this is a survey of offshore jurisdictions, which is going to be the most important 5 years from now. And number 5 is the USA, which I think is a very, very interesting dynamic. So we've spoken a lot in the last few years about offshore, about trends of moving towards mid-shore jurisdictions. Mid-shore jurisdictions having elements of offshore, not necessarily small islands, but having some element of offshore legislation, whether a territorial tax code, whether some innovative legislation. So places like Ireland, Cyprus, Malta, Hong Kong, Singapore. But what we're seeing here when we look here is we're seeing something else a little bit different. And we've coined a term this year called super jurisdictions. And super jurisdictions, we think, are places like London, Dubai, New York, Hong Kong, Singapore, that are very often large city-states that set their own legislation. And we define these as, we look again at the market in three different scopes. We look at where clients come from, so client originating geographies. We look at markets, so where clients go to do their business, and then we look at the jurisdictions that people actually use when they get to that jurisdiction. So a simple example that all of us would have seen who work in financial services in the BVI would be a Russian citizen who goes to Cyprus as his market to get a BVI company as the jurisdiction. That's the example. Or you would have a Chinese citizen who goes to Hong Kong to get a Cayman structure. Those would be the examples of those originating geography, the markets where they go to do business, and the jurisdictions that they use. But all of these examples that we're talking about here, all of these ones, Dubai, Hong Kong, Singapore, London as well, New York, these super jurisdictions fulfill all of those criteria. So there are places of 5, 6, 10 million citizens. So they are client originating geographies. There are places where people go to do the business themselves. So they're hubs where people go to travel to conduct their business and to live and to send their children to school. And they now have their own jurisdictions themselves that they are actively promoting. So super jurisdictions do present a little bit of a danger. We think that most of the mid-shore jurisdictions work very cooperatively with offshore. This is very often not a zero-sum game. You'll see more complex structures with a Hong Kong structure and a BVI structure and all of these things in more complex planning. But we do think that super jurisdictions, since I stood before you last year, I've relocated my home is still the BVI for as long as the Premier allows me here. My home is still the BVI, but I'm based in Dubai working. And Dubai is actively competing with the BVI. There's some hidden taxes there, trying to drive them to use your own structures to open up bank accounts rather than using BVI companies. BVI is still very, very popular there, but they're trying to push it to use their own sort of jurisdictions as well. So there are some threats there as well, and these are things that we think are very, very significant to continue watching. So that's the end of the survey. I've got 2 more slides here where this is my personal opinion, so don't hold it against Oil or anybody else represented here. And what we did last year was Russell asked me to come up with 5 sort of opportunities for the BVI. And these were the ones that we came up with last year. BVI being prevalent in Asia, and again, that's very, very significant and important because we've seen where the growth is predicted to come from. So that's good news. Innovation. Many mid-shore jurisdictions, many onshore places, they've reviewed their legislation. They've looked at their legislation. Hong Kong spent years and years looking at their trust legislation. And they said, can't we do a Vista Trust? Can't we do something? But they felt that they couldn't be as innovative as the offshore jurisdictions. They didn't want to take that extra step and get branded as being like the BVI or being offshore. So they can't be quite as innovative as the offshore jurisdictions like the BVI. One of the fantastic things that the BVI has done in the last year or so was within the fund space in terms of the incubator funds and the approved funds. That is exactly in the sweet spot of the BVI, taking something, marketing it to a specific sector, so startup managers, trying to compete with Cayman in some of that space. So that's a very, very significant development. Regulatory, Dawn will pull the plug on my microphone if I'm too rude. The term bank bashing comes to mind when we think about regulation at the moment. You'll be familiar with that term. It's particularly prevalent in the US and the UK, where there's been, since the global financial crisis, there's been this whole cycle of bank bashing. And I feel that, for us in the private sector, regulators have been put under extreme pressure to regulate the industries that they operate. And there's a point at which that regulation can go too far. Dawn, I don't know what the headcount is of the enforcement division. It's probably comparable to the people who are issuing trust licenses. And when we get to that point, we've lost direction in terms of what we're doing. The regulator has to do their job, but unless we believe that all of our financial services and all of the people that are operating here are operating a criminal enterprise, and I don't think that they are. There are some people that may be, but I think the majority are. But there's been a great deal of inspections and regulatory fines and penalties, and there's a point at which we have to get kind of beyond that. We've been a good regulator, and we need to move on together. So that's my regulatory part. I think regulation, again, it's how it's implemented and how it is done. We have lots and lots and lots of regulation now. It's how it is operated effectively and efficiently so we can all work together for the better of the jurisdiction. Quality of life, I wanted to make this point and the will to make it happen. Obviously, the government was returned with even stronger majority and lots of political capital to move things forward. And I'll touch on the McKinsey work just on the next slide. So this is what we have for this year. This is my penultimate slide, Russell, so getting there. Just want to touch on the bank account issue. I'm not going to say anything more on that. I know we have a presentation coming up. I'm very, very excited to hear what those gentlemen have to say, because banking was less of an issue last year because it was a level playing field. But since then, there are banks here that are closing lots and lots of client accounts for our clients, and it's becoming a bigger problem every single day as banks continue to de-risk, including those ones here. We cannot be a financial services center without banks, and I won't say anything more, gentlemen. Open for business. This, to me, is absolutely critical. And the way that I think about it in the BVI is an ongoing push-pull situation. That we're trying to pull people in, we're trying to pull business in, but there are bureaucracies and institutional aspects that push people away at the same time. I'm very encouraged by the Premier's comments, very encouraged to hear about the work that Mr. Ferrara has done, and greatly looking forward to see developments here. The ladies will hate me for this, but we have two ladies here from our Hong Kong office, very experienced managers. Those ladies have probably been involved in more BVI incorporations and more BVI certificates of good standing and more BVI certificates of incumbency than anybody in the world. They're here for a couple of days attending meetings, had to get temporary work permits. It's just why we should be rolling out the red carpet for people like that to come and visit us here. The work permits were processed very efficiently and very effectively, but it's just all of the sorts of processes that you have to go through. Constant push-pull. When I went to Dubai in March to get my work permit, all of that was done very, very quickly, no issues. It's a push-pull. So we talk about value add, we talk about all of these sorts of things, but our institutions and our bureaucracy, there's a push away at the same time. So very, very encouraged by the comments that we've had today, but it's open for business. but then it's open for business, question mark. And it has to come all of the way through. I know that if I speak to the Premier, the Deputy Premier, the FS, the PS, the Premier's office, they'll say yes, yes, yes. When you get further down the chain, there are lots of no's further down there. We're getting more response on that one than Russell than anything else. A couple of things just in relation to legislation and where we are now. We've been speaking very much at a macro level. We're just speaking a little bit at a micro level now. Legislation. We are currently, right now, at a point in the BVI with the biggest changes in our legislation for the last 10 years. This is a very, very significant time for the BVI. It's a very worrying time because of all of the other things that are going on and all these other sorts of trends that we're seeing. But it is a concerning time, and there's new regulation, and we haven't communicated that to the industry as well as we could have communicated it to the industry. And what that does is it creates uncertainty, and the industry and our clients hate uncertainty. On the 1st of April 2016, we will be bringing in a regime in relation to register of directors that is the most rigorous in the world. I'll repeat that. That is the most rigorous in the world. That's not a good thing. There's no need for that. We need to do this. We need to do this. But there are specific sections of that that are just not correct. And Premier, my plead to you is there are parts of that that we will need to change. And we need to change it sooner rather than later, and we need to communicate it to our clients. Because we are creating a huge amount of uncertainty, and I can tell you that the start of the year for BVI and corporations has been very poor. Because as a result of the uncertainty that we have created through a lack of communication and through uncertainty that we have created. So there's lots, we've spoken about lots and lots and lots of very, very positive things. When we come down to the ground today, the 12th of January or whatever it is, we have 13th, thank you. That there are some issues that we do need to resolve. We can resolve those very quickly, and I think the most encouraging thing to me, Russell's come and take the microphone, the most encouraging thing to me when we look back at our track record over the last 25 years, we always end up getting things right. And I'm talking about we in terms of the whole BVI financial services industry, government, regulator, private sector. We end up getting things right. When we change things, we don't always change things very effectively, and that's the concern. So I think, again, we're stuck in a little bit of a change period now where we have uncertainty. We've created uncertainty. I'm confident that we will get through that and we will get to the right point. But we need to do that sooner rather than later. That's my extemporizing. And then the last thing I would talk about here would just be the McKinsey work. I don't think Kedrick's here, but we need to be very brave. You're going to turn my microphone off. I reached out to some very senior private sector people in Jersey over the last week or so, and if you speak to them, they will tell you that the McKinsey work was a waste of money and none of the objectives were achieved. I don't believe for 1 second that that's going to be the case here.
That's a competitor. It's a little early to.
No. But this is what they are saying on the ground. This is with no relation to what's happening here. No relation to what's happening here. But they're saying that their work that they went through, they did not achieve the objectives that they wanted to. So I don't believe that that's going to happen here. But I'm just throwing it out there that we need to be very brave and we need to use the political capital that's been garnered appropriately and drive things forward right now, because now is absolutely the time. I'm getting one clap here. Everybody else will be throwing things at me. Okay, I'm gonna get off the stage very quickly. Okay, this is the last slide. So this is just to sum up the survey. Going back to talking about the offshore industry in a global perspective. We believe that the industry now is stronger and more resilient than it has ever been. If you said to any of us 10 years ago that all of these changes, talking about public registers, filing register of director information, tax information being exchanged all over the world, if you told any of that to us in the industry 10 years ago, we would have all changed our jobs and gone back and done something else. But that's not the case. All of the service providers are bigger, stronger, business is more complex, business is more sophisticated, and it is a stronger, better industry than it was. Asian demand continues to be very important. Compliance, again, hugely important. A theme over the next couple of years is going to be how do we all turn compliance from a cost center to a revenue generating center. That's a discussion for another day. Public relations battle, again, there has been some progress there during the last year. And then consolidation of service providers. I just want to touch on this very, very quickly. Russell's already mentioned it. Consolidation of service providers is happening. There is nothing that the BVI or any other jurisdiction can do to stop that. And consolidation does bring winners and losers in terms of work being outsourced, work being insourced. I saw Colin O'Neill made some very interesting comments during the course of this week. And what it means from a BVI financial services sector is that there has to be a reason for the work to be done here and for that work to be done efficiently and effectively. That's ultimately what it boils down to. And those are the decisions that employers around the world will be making when they decide where work is going to be done. Does it have to be done there? Yes. How much more work can we do there? Can we do it efficiently? And can we do it effectively? And that is the challenge for the BVI, which is an ongoing challenge, and that will continue to be the challenge over the next few years. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you very much for Russell
Good.
and allowing me to speak.